Everyone froze. The guests' gazes were directed toward the kitchen, where the broken plates lay on the floor. I raised my head, and our gazes met. My wife was silent. A smile twitched faintly at the corners of her lips. What now? The silence between us grew louder with each passing month. It wasn't always like this. There was a time when the space between us was filled with laughter, shared glances, and the warmth of knowing that no matter what, we were in this together. But that warmth had been cooling for a while now, replaced by a quiet that felt more suffocating than peaceful. At first, I thought it was just the natural ebb and flow of a long-term marriage. People change, life gets in the way, work stress, daily routine. But then, I started noticing the subtle shifts. The way she would flinch slightly when I reached for her hand. How she'd turn away just a little too quickly when I kissed her goodbye. In the mornings, the conversations that used to last late into the night now ended before they even began. I asked her about it more than once. "Are we okay?" I had asked one night, lying in bed beside her, staring at the ceiling while she scrolled through her phone. She sighed, locking her screen and turning toward me, her face unreadable in the dim light. "Of course we are. Why wouldn't we be?" "I don't know," I admitted. "You just seem distant." She exhaled sharply, frustration flickering across her face. "I'm tired. Work has been stressful. You always think there's something wrong." Because there was. I could feel it. The way you can tell a storm is coming long before the clouds roll in. The fight started becoming more frequent. Not big blowouts, not at first. Just small, tense arguments that simmered under the surface until they boiled over into something ugly. I'd try to talk, to reach her, but she'd shut me down, her responses clipped, eyes flat. I told myself it was just a rough patch, that every marriage had them, but deep down, a voice whispered, "This feels different." It wasn't one thing that triggered my suspicions. It was a collection of tiny moments, each one insignificant on its own, but together forming a picture I didn't want to see. The phone calls she'd take in another room, lowering her voice just enough that I couldn't make out the words. The sudden, unexplained errands that pulled her away at odd hours. The way she seemed irritated by my presence, as if my very existence was an inconvenience. One night she left for a quick run to the store, and came back 2 hours later with nothing but a pack of gum. When I asked about it, she snapped, "Jesus, do I need to report my every move to you now?" That wasn't like her. I wasn't naive. I didn't want to be that guy, the one who ignored the writing on the wall, but I also wasn't ready to accuse her of something without proof. I needed to be sure, and then I made my own mistake. It started as something harmless, or so I told myself. A message from an old friend on Facebook, Rachel, someone I had dated briefly before meeting my wife. She reached out one evening, a simple, "Hey, it's been a while, hope you're doing well." I hesitated before replying, but the truth was, I was lonely. I had been for a long time. At first, the conversation was innocent, catching up, talking about work, life, but then it drifted into deeper waters. She asked how I was really doing, and I found myself telling her things I hadn't even admitted to myself. About how I felt like a ghost in my own marriage, how I missed feeling wanted. She understood. Too well. The messages turned into late-night conversations, nothing explicit, but there was an undercurrent there. A connection I hadn't felt in a long time. I didn't cheat, not physically, but I knew. Deep down, I had crossed a line, and I hated myself for it. I should have stopped. I should have deleted the messages, walked away. But I didn't. And then my wife found them. I don't know how she discovered the texts, whether it was an unlocked phone or just a gut feeling that led her to check. But one evening she was waiting for me when I got home, my phone in her hands. "What the hell is this?" Her voice was low, controlled, but her eyes burned with something raw. I had nothing. No excuse. No way to explain it without making it sound worse. It wasn't anything, I said, and the words felt weak even as they left my mouth. Her expression twisted in something between disbelief and disgust. "Not anything?" She let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "You think I'm stupid? You've been sneaking around behind my back whispering to some other woman and you call that nothing?" It wasn't like that, I tried again. Just, you were just what? She cut in, stepping closer. Lonely? Needing someone to make you feel special? Poor you. Her voice dripped with sarcasm, but I could see the hurt underneath. I swallowed hard. I made a mistake. A mistake? She repeated the words like they tasted bitter. You betrayed me. She wasn't wrong. She threw the phone onto the couch and crossed her arms, staring at me as if I were a stranger. I should leave, she muttered. I should walk out that door and never come back. Something cold settled in my chest. Then why don't you? The moment stretched, thick with tension. Her jaw clenched, and for a second I thought she might actually go. But instead, she just shook her head, eyes dark with something I couldn't place. I don't know, she said finally, and then, softer. Maybe I already have. The next 18 months were hell. She stayed, but something between us had shattered that night. I tried to fix things, to rebuild, but she didn't let me. She withdrew, her touches cold, her kisses absent. She stopped looking at me the way she used to. And worst of all, I could feel her slipping away, but I couldn't do a damn thing to stop it. She started going out more, making excuses, coming home late. I told myself I deserved it, that I had lost the right to question her. But then, one night, something shifted. I noticed it in the way she carried herself, the way she spoke to me, not with distance, but with something close to guilt. And that's when the real doubt set in. Was she seeing someone else? Had she already been? I didn't have proof. Not yet. But the signs were there, and I couldn't ignore them anymore. The change happened subtly at first. After nearly a year and a half of cold silences and distant glances, she started warming up to me again. Small things at first, a hand resting on my shoulder in passing, a lingering glance across the dinner table. Then suddenly, it escalated. She started laughing at my jokes again, asking how my day was, sitting next to me on the couch instead of across the room. And then, one night, she climbed into bed with me. For the first time in months, she was the one to reach for me. I didn't know how to react. Every instinct told me not to trust it, that this was too sudden, too much of a shift. But my body had other ideas, and my mind, so desperate to believe that maybe, just maybe, we were finally finding our way back, chose to silence the doubt. That night was different. There was an urgency to her touch, something almost desperate, like she was trying to erase the past year in a single moment. When it was over, she pressed her face into my chest and whispered, I missed you. I wanted to believe it. God, I wanted to. But something inside me felt off. In the weeks that followed, things continued to change. She was affectionate again, touching me, kissing me, initiating intimacy. She asked about my day, listened when I spoke. For the first time in what felt like forever, we were laughing again. To anyone else, it would have seemed like a marriage healing itself. To me, it felt like an act. It was in the small moments, the way she would smile at me, but her eyes stayed distant. How sometimes, after being with me, she'd sit on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor as if lost in thought. There were times she'd leave for a quick errand and come back different, like something in her had shifted in those hours away. And then there were the odd conversations. One night, as we lay in bed, she turned to me, running her fingers absently over my arm. Do you ever think about starting over? She asked. I frowned, unsure how to answer. What do you mean? She hesitated. Like, if we had a second chance. If we could erase everything bad that's happened and just start fresh. I studied her face, trying to gauge what she was really asking. I don't think it works like that, I said carefully. You don't just erase things, you deal with them. She gave a small, sad smile. Yeah, I guess. I wanted to ask her what she meant, if she was talking about us, if she had regrets, but something in her expression told me I wouldn't get a real answer. The unease settled deeper when I started noticing inconsistencies. She wasn't careless. If she was hiding something, she was good at it. But it was the little things. She'd tell me she was meeting a friend for coffee, but when I casually brought it up later, she'd fumble the details. One night, she claimed she was at the gym, but I found her sneakers still by the door, untouched. I tried not to jump to conclusions. Maybe I was paranoid. Maybe I was projecting my own guilt from before. But then I did something I swore I wouldn't do. I checked her phone. I told myself it was just curiosity, that I wasn't really snooping. But the moment I picked it up, my hands felt clammy, my heart pounding too hard. I went straight to her messages. Nothing. No saved texts, no calls, no suspicious names. But that was the problem. She had wiped everything. A person who had nothing to hide wouldn't feel the need to erase every single message from their phone. Didn't say anything. Not yet. Instead, I started watching. I checked bank statements. Just routine expenses, nothing unusual. I casually asked about her day, listening for gaps in her stories. I even drove by the cafe where she claimed to be meeting a friend. She wasn't there. Still, I had no proof. Nothing I could confront her with, and then she dropped the bombshell. I'm pregnant. The words knocked the air from my lungs. I sat there frozen as she smiled, wide-eyed, breathless, waiting for my reaction. I managed to choke out a stunned, "What?" She laughed, covering her mouth with her hands like she couldn't believe it either. "I found out this morning. I wanted to tell you right away." My mind raced. We had only started sleeping together again a few weeks ago. It didn't add up, but I kept my face neutral, forced my lips into a smile. "That's incredible." She exhaled in relief and reached for my hands. "I know we weren't expecting this, but maybe it's a good thing. A fresh start. A fresh start." Her words from before echoed in my mind. I nodded slowly, forcing enthusiasm. "Yeah, maybe." She wrapped her arms around me, pressing her face into my neck, and as I held her, something inside me twisted. I needed to know the truth. For the next week, I played my part perfectly. I acted excited, talked about baby names, even suggested we start setting up a nursery. She seemed at ease, smiling more, leaning into the role of a glowing mother-to-be. But inside, I was spiraling. I started thinking about all the time she'd been gone without explanation. The way she had suddenly turned affectionate again. The fact that she had cleaned her phone completely just weeks before telling me she was pregnant. I needed more than gut feelings. I needed proof. I started with something simple. One evening, while she was in the shower, I went to her purse. My hands shook as I rummaged through it, my breath coming in shallow gulps. And then, I found it. A receipt. For a doctor's visit. Barely breathed as I scanned the date, 2 weeks ago. That didn't make sense. She had told me she found out this week. Something didn't add up. The next morning, after she left for work, I did something reckless. I called the clinic. I didn't expect them to tell me anything. I wasn't her after all. But I played dumb, said I was calling to confirm an appointment. The receptionist, clearly not paying much attention, glanced at her records. "Looks like she was last here 2 weeks ago for a confirmation," she said. "Would you like to schedule a follow-up?" I could barely hear over the ringing in my ears. Confirmation, 2 weeks ago. Before we even started sleeping together again, I mumbled a quick, "No, thank you," and hung up. The floor felt like it was tilting beneath me. There was no way this baby was mine. I sat down heavily, my hands gripping my knees as I tried to steady my breathing. She had lied to me. I didn't know who he was. I didn't know how long it had been going on, but now I knew one thing for sure. She had been seeing someone else, and now she was carrying his child. The weight of it settled into my chest like a stone. I had been blind before, a fool even, but not anymore. This time I would get the truth, no matter what it took. I wasn't sure how long I sat there after hanging up the phone. My mind was blank, my body numb. The realization had hit me like a bullet, but the pain hadn't set in yet. Not fully. She was pregnant, and it wasn't mine. I clenched my fists, staring at the floor as the silence in the house grew heavier. My breath came in slow, measured inhales, like my body was trying to keep me from falling apart. I needed to be sure. I needed proof. The first thing I did was check her phone again. She kept it close now, barely letting it out of her sight. But that night, after she fell asleep, I slipped it from her nightstand. No messages, no calls, no browsing history. She had erased everything, That confirmed it for me. No one cleans their phone unless they have something to hide. But there was something she hadn't thought to delete. A number. It was listed under a random name, someone I didn't recognize, but when I ran a search through our shared phone plan, the number appeared frequently in the call logs. Late nights, early mornings, long conversations. I stared at it for a long time before making my next move. I copied the number and called it from a different phone. It rang once, twice. Then it went to voicemail, a man's voice. I didn't recognize it, but I would. The next few days were torture. I pretended everything was fine. I smiled when she talked about the baby, nodded when she mentioned future plans, kissed her when she left for work. But inside, I was unraveling. I tracked the number, followed its movements. There were patterns. Calls right before she left for an errand. Calls after she came back home. Once, when she said she was at a friend's house, her phone pinged in an entirely different part of town. It was all unraveling before me. And then, I saw them. It happened by accident. I hadn't planned on following her, not yet, but I was out running an errand when I saw her car parked outside a cafe. I pulled over, heart hammering, hands gripping the steering wheel. And there, he was, sitting across from her. They weren't touching. They weren't kissing. But the way she leaned toward him, the way he smiled at her, it was enough. I felt something inside me snap. That night, I set my trap. We had dinner together. She talked about baby names again, her voice light, casual, like nothing was wrong, like she hadn't been sitting across from another man this morning. I played along. Then, when we were in bed, I asked, "When did you find out you were pregnant again?" She shifted slightly, turning to face me. "I told you last week," I nodded, "and that was the first time you suspected, right?" She hesitated. It was brief, almost imperceptible. But I caught it. "Yeah," she said. "Of course." I took a deep breath. My pulse pounded in my ears. Funny, because I called the clinic today. Silence. I could feel her body tense beside me. "They said you were there 2 weeks ago," I continued, my voice eerily calm. "For a confirmation." She didn't move, didn't speak. I turned my head to look at her. 2 weeks ago," I repeated. Before we even started sleeping. Together again. The room felt impossibly small. Her face was unreadable, but I could see it in her eyes. The flicker of panic, the gears turning, the calculations. Then she did what she always did. She went on the attack. "Are you seriously accusing me of something right now?" Her voice was sharp, incredulous. "After everything you did? After you cheated on me?" I exhaled slowly, trying to keep control. "I never cheated," I said. "I screwed up, yes, but I never slept with anyone else. You did." She sat up now, shaking her head. "Oh, so now you're the victim? Unbelievable." She let out a bitter laugh. "You're just looking for an excuse. You've been waiting for something to pin on me, haven't you?" "You're deflecting." "I am not deflecting. You've always been paranoid. You're just... Who is he?" I cut her off. She froze. For the first time, she had nothing to say. I pushed forward. "I've seen the call logs. I saw you with him today." She inhaled sharply. "You... what?" "I know." The words hung between us. For a long moment, there was only silence. Then she closed her eyes, exhaling through her nose, and when she opened them again, she smiled. Not a warm smile. Not a guilty one. A cold, knowing smirk. And that was the moment I knew. She wasn't sorry. She never had been. The next few days were a blur. She packed a bag, said she needed space. I didn't stop her. I stayed in the house, alone. Then the night of the party came, a celebration for the baby, for our new beginning, except I knew the truth now. She came back that evening wearing a dress I had never seen before. She looked beautiful. Perfect. Like a woman who had already won. The house filled with friends, family, people congratulating us, toasting to our future. I played my role. I smiled. I laughed. But I waited. Then, it happened. I had gone to the kitchen. to grab another drink when I heard them, her and her best friend. They didn't know I was there. They didn't know I was listening. So, how did you pull it off? The friend whispered, laughing. Pull what off? My wife asked. Come on. A playful nudge. How did you convince him the baby was his? Silence. Then, a soft chuckle. Men believe what they want to believe. I dropped the glass. It shattered against the tile, the sound cutting through the noise of the party. Everything went still. I looked up. She was standing there. Our eyes met, and for the first time, I saw her completely. Not the woman I had loved. Not the woman I had fought for. A stranger. Her face paled, her lips parted slightly, but there was no panic, no guilt, just calculation. And then, ever so slightly, she smiled. I don't remember much after that, people asking if I was okay. The room spinning, the taste of metal in my mouth as I clenched my jaw so hard it ached. She tried to talk to me later, tried to explain. I didn't listen, because there was nothing left to say. I packed my bag the next morning. She didn't stop. Me. She just watched. And as I stepped out the door, she spoke one last time. You'll come back. I turned to look at her. At that cold, confident expression, at the woman who had destroyed me, and for the first time in years, I smiled back. No, I said. I won't. The air felt different outside. Lighter. For the first time in a long time. I wasn't drowning. I was free. But as I walked away, one thought remained. One last, lingering question. Had it ever been real? Or had I just been lying to myself all along?